All right, everyone, get ready because we're about to launch a brand new spin-off series today. Welcome to the Tenant Chronicles Vol 1.
Right here on the deep dive.
You got it.
We are going to be talking about all of the dramas and the dilemmas that you can experience as a landlord.
Exactly. Whether you're a landlord or thinking about getting into property rentals, or honestly, even if you just like a little bit of real-world property drama.
This is the series for you.
This is it.
And before we get into it,
Yes.
a quick shout out to our sponsors.
Yes.
Flowers and Associates.
Yes.
They are the experts when it comes to property rentals consulting. And if you're interested in real estate investing with a focus on special needs housing, this is the place to go.
Plus, they have these amazing free workshop tools to help you get started.
They do.
You might remember we've talked in previous episodes about Robert Flowers.
Yes.
Who wrote the book The Joy of Helping Others Create Passive Income Streams Through Special Needs Housing.
That's right.
And if you want to learn more about that, you can go check it out on Amazon. And honestly, after doing this series and looking into all of his work, I can say it's a must-read if you're even thinking about being a landlord.
It is.
So with that out of the way,
Yes.
have you ever wondered what really goes on behind the scenes of being a landlord?
Oh, yeah.
It's not all passive income and sunshine and roses.
Definitely not.
So this series is going to be about shedding light on all of the real-life challenges that landlords face based on Robert Flowers' book.
That's right.
And more importantly, we're going to be talking about some practical solutions for these problems.
Exactly.
So today we're going to go into 4 classic problem tenant scenarios.
Okay.
The phantom renter, the noisy nightmare, the damage dealer, and the unpaid bills.
I love these names.
Each one is like a potential pitfall.
They are.
But luckily, Robert Flowers has armed us with the knowledge to tackle them.
Yes, he has.
So let's start with the phantom renter.
Okay.
Honestly, just that name alone has me intrigued.
I know, it's so mysterious.
Right.
Okay, so imagine you think you have a really reliable tenant all settled in. Okay.
And then you uncover that they have secretly turned your property into a short-term rental hub.
Oh, no.
So now you start getting complaints about noise damage. You have a constant stream of unfamiliar faces coming in and out of your property.
It's a landlord's worst nightmare.
It really is, especially when you have carefully vetted your tenants and have a peaceful community.
It disrupts everything.
It does.
So what can a landlord do if they find out that they have been duped by one of these phantom renters?
Well, Robert really emphasizes documentation.
Yeah.
In one of the cases that he talks about, the landlord actually gathered photographic evidence of the endless parade of guests coming in and out.
Oh, wow.
They collected written complaints from frustrated neighbors. They even took screenshots of the online listings where the property was being advertised as a short-term rental.
So really thorough.
Yes.
Meticulous.
To prove this isn't just a one-off, it's a real problem.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes.
So you're building a solid foundation for any action that you might need to take later.
Right.
But does it always have to go that far?
No, not at all.
Is there any room to try to work things out amicably first?
Absolutely. Robert actually advocates for a formal yet approachable approach.
Okay.
So in this particular scenario, the landlord started by issuing a formal notice of a lease violation, specifically pointing out the part of the lease that prohibited subletting.
Okay.
It's a clear signal that the landlord is aware of the situation
Right.
and is taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And then the landlord arranged a meeting with the tenant, creating an opportunity for open dialogue
Yeah.
and potential resolution. So it shows the tenant that you're willing to communicate directly and find a solution,
Yeah.
as opposed to just jumping straight to legal action.
Right. It's like extending that olive branch,
Right.
but also setting a clear boundary.
Yes, exactly.
So what if the tenant just completely ignores the warning and they just keep on subletting?
Oh, yeah. That happens.
It seems like some people just bank on landlords being too busy
Yeah.
or not wanting to take things further.
Sadly, that is true, and that's exactly what happened in this case.
Oh, no.
The tenant just chose to ignore the warning and just continued doing what they were doing.
So they kept running their short-term rental operation.
Yeah. So at that point, the landlord had no other choice than to bring in a property attorney to start eviction proceedings.
Wow.
They also contacted the short-term rental platform, directly providing evidence of the unauthorized activity,
Okay.
and urged them to remove the listing.
So they went straight to the source.
Yes,
That seems like it could be really expensive and emotionally draining, even if you're in the right.
it definitely can be.
So what happened after that?
Well, once the landlord got possession of the property back, they made some changes to avoid this happening again.
Okay.
So first, they revised their lease agreement, making the language around subletting super clear.
Okay.
And then they installed noise monitoring devices to try and deter future tenants from hosting these really loud gatherings.
So they learned from the experience
They did.
and tried to make their rental business more resilient.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to our next troublesome tenant,
Okay.
the noisy nightmare.
Oh.
Honestly, I think anyone who's lived in an apartment building can relate to this,
Oh, I'm sure.
at least on some level.
Yes.
So imagine your tenant is throwing frequent late-night parties.
Okay.
You're dealing with the police coming over and over again. You've got angry neighbors, and your own reputation as a responsible landlord is on the line.
Yeah, that sounds like it could quickly go from annoying to really damaging.
Yeah, you've got the immediate disruption, but then you've also got that long-term impact on your relationship with the community and your other tenants.
Exactly.
So in situations like this, how do you handle it?
Well, Robert recommends a multi-pronged approach, starting with clear and consistent communication.
Okay.
It's about being firm but fair.
Okay.
The landlord in this example actually began by giving the tenant a written warning,
Well,
outlining the issue, and they meticulously documented every single incident.
okay.
Dates, times, copies of police reports.
So really detailed paper trail.
Yeah.
To prove this is an ongoing problem.
Exactly.
It seems like documentation is a recurring theme in these situations.
It is.
It's like they say if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen.
Right. You need that evidence, especially if you end up needing to take legal action.
Right.
But it's not just about warnings and documentation.
Okay.
Robert also stresses that human element.
Okay.
So after the written warning, the landlord actually sat down with the tenant to discuss community expectations,
Okay.
and they explored solutions together.
For?
So things like designating quiet hours and even the possibility of breaking the lease early if the tenant really couldn't adapt to the community rules.
So being solution-oriented rather than just punitive.
Exactly.
Did that work?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh.
Despite the landlord's attempts to find a peaceful resolution, the noise complaints just kept on coming.
And the tenant just didn't want to change their behavior.
They didn't seem willing or able to.
So then what happened?
So at that point, the landlord had no other option than to escalate things further. So they brought in a mediator,
Okay.
a neutral third party who's trained to facilitate constructive conversations and try to find a compromise.
So trying to explore options and resolutions outside of a courtroom setting,
Yes,
hopefully finding a solution that works for everyone.
right.
But it seems like landlords wear many hats.
They do.
Property manager,
Yeah.
communicator, mediator.
That's true.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is, and sadly, even mediation didn't work in this case.
Oh, no.
So ultimately, with legal counsel, the landlord had to move forward with a formal eviction notice.
So the last resort.
Yes, but sometimes it is the only way to protect the interests of other tenants in your property.
I understand.
Yeah.
So what did this landlord learn from all of this?
They definitely learned a valuable lesson about thorough tenant screening.
Okay.
So from that point on, they implemented a much stricter vetting process for new tenants. So we're talking really in-depth background checks, references from previous landlords and credit checks to make sure that they were bringing responsible and respectful individuals into their community.
Like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
So it's better to take that time up front to really make sure you're getting good tenants
Yes.
than to deal with a noisy nightmare down the road.
All right.
Okay.
So are you ready for our next property drama?
That's it. Bring it on.
This is The Damage Dealer. A tale as old as time, but still manages to shock even seasoned landlords.
Oh, no.
Okay, imagine this. A tenant moves out. You walk into your property expecting, reasonable wear and tear.
Right?
But instead you are met with utter devastation.
Oh, no.
Holes in the walls, stained carpets beyond repair, appliances seemingly attacked with a vengeance.
It's straight out of a landlord's nightmare.
It is.
Yeah, this sounds like a punch to the gut.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone expects some wear and tear,
Of course.
but that level of destruction is beyond the pale. So what do you do as a landlord when you're met with that kind of damage?
So Robert emphasizes the importance of a systematized response,
Okay.
armed with a detailed checklist and a camera.
Okay.
This landlord conducted a thorough walkthrough of the ravaged property,
Okay.
and they documented every inch of the damage, comparing it to the pristine condition in their move-in inspection report.
That sounds like a lifesaver,
It is.
that move-in inspection report.
It's like a time machine to prove the property's condition before the tenant moved in.
Exactly.
It's non-negotiable for any landlord who is looking to protect themselves.
For sure.
So after they documented all the damage, they formally notified the tenant in writing.
Okay.
about the deductions from the security deposit that they were going to be making to cover the repairs,
Okay.
providing a clear breakdown.
So being very transparent
Yes,
about what was assessed, how much it would cost to fix.
exactly.
But I have a feeling that often that security deposit probably falls short of the full cost of the damage.
You are absolutely right. And in this case, the damage far exceeded the security deposit.
Okay.
This tenant had really gone on a rampage.
Oh my gosh.
So that's when things get a little bit more complex.
Yeah. So what options do you have as a landlord when you're facing a bill that's way more than that security deposit?
Well, in this case, the landlord took the tenant to small claims court.
Okay.
And guess what they won?
Wow.
The court recognized the damage and ruled in favor of the landlord, awarding them a judgment for the remaining costs.
So the system worked.
It did in this case.
It's great that the landlord was able to recoup their losses,
Yes.
but going through that whole legal process must have been a stressful ordeal.
It can be, but Robert highlights how this landlord actually used this negative experience as a catalyst for positive change.
Okay.
So from that point on, they included a periodic inspection clause in all their new leases,
Oh, that's smart.
giving them the right to check in on the property throughout the tenancy.
Catch those problems before they become big, costly problems. And they didn't just stop there, did they?
No, they didn't.
They made some upgrades to their rental properties
They did.
to make them more durable.
Exactly.
They replaced the carpet with easy-to-clean vinyl plank flooring.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
They opted for semi-gloss paint, which is much easier to clean.
Especially when you're dealing with spills or crayon masterpieces.
Yeah.
It's about anticipating those problems and trying to minimize the damage.
Exactly.
Turn those lemons into lemonade.
They did.
Okay, so now it's time to tackle our final problem tenant scenario for today,
Okay.
the unpaid bills.
Uh-oh.
I feel like this is one that every landlord probably encounters at some point.
It's very common.
Yeah, it's one of those universal challenges that transcends property types and demographics.
Exactly.
So picture this. You have a tenant who's constantly falling behind on rent.
Okay.
They always have a new excuse, maybe financial hardship or unexpected expenses.
Right.
They promise to catch up, but the rent payments never actually appear.
It's a stressful situation for everyone,
It really is.
especially landlords who are torn between empathy and the need to protect their business.
Yeah, it's that balance between compassion and practicality.
Right.
It can be hard to navigate.
It is.
So how do you approach a situation like this?
Well, Robert, being a firm believer in proactive measures, advises landlords to act quickly and decisively.
Okay.
So as soon as that rent grace period ends, he recommends issuing a formal late notice
Okay.
outlining the consequences of continued non-payment.
Right. So setting a clear boundary.
Yes, and
Yeah.
reminding the tenant of their contractual obligations.
So you're not letting things slide,
Oh,
but you are communicating clearly.
right.
And you're giving them a chance to rectify the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
But is it just about laying down the law?
No.
Oh.
Robert also emphasizes that compassion and exploring other solutions.
Okay.
So in this case, the landlord offered the tenant a structured payment plan
Okay.
to try to help them get back on track while ensuring that the landlord received their payments,
Yeah.
even if it was on a slightly delayed schedule.
Right. So finding a middle ground where both parties can hopefully benefit.
Yes.
It's great that the landlord was willing to work with the tenant,
Yes.
but I imagine there needs to be some accountability in that payment plan too.
Absolutely.
How did they handle that?
So they proposed a payment plan where they split the overdue rent over a few months,
Okay.
which would make it more manageable for the tenant.
Yeah.
But it also included a smaller immediate payment as a sign of good faith
Right.
to demonstrate the tenant's commitment to fulfilling the agreement.
It's like balancing flexibility with accountability.
Exactly.
So it's like saying, we're willing to work with you,
Yes.
but we also need to see that you're serious about getting back on track.
Right.
And they didn't stop there, did they?
No.
They connected the tenant with resources for rental assistance programs
They did.
and financial counseling.
Yes.
So going above and beyond
Yes.
to really try to help this tenant.
Yes.
But what happens if the tenant just doesn't follow through on the payment plan?
It does happen, unfortunately, and sadly, that's exactly what happened in this situation.
Oh, no.
The tenant didn't follow through with the payment plan.
And they defaulted on the agreement.
They did.
So what happened next?
So the landlord had no other option but to proceed with an eviction.
Even though they tried so hard to help,
Yes,
it's heartbreaking.
it is a heart-wrenching decision.
But it sounds like the landlord did everything they could to try to support the tenant and find a workable solution.
They did.
And ultimately, they had to protect their business and their own financial well-being.
They did.
So what did they learn from this experience?
They learned even stricter screening practices are important, especially when it comes to financial stability.
Yeah.
So from that point on, they became more rigorous in verifying income-to-rent ratios
Okay.
and started requiring co-signers for applicants with less than perfect credit histories.
So taking those extra steps to try to minimize those risks.
Exactly.
Wow, so we've covered a lot today. It's like we've gone through a whirlwind of real-life landlord drama.
We have.
But you've also given us so many practical solutions to these problems.
And I hope you can apply them in your own businesses.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can learn from other people's experiences.
It is.
All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you.
And we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.
For part 2 of the Problem Tenant Chronicles.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive's Problem Tenant Chronicles.
Yes, welcome back.
Last time we left off talking about the unpaid bills and the importance of having a clear procedure for late rent and evictions.
Yeah, definitely protecting your investment
Right.
while navigating those human situations.
Right.
Speaking of tricky situations,
Yeah.
our next scenario is the hoarder,
The hoarder.
which can really test a landlord's patience and resourcefulness.
I can imagine that sounds pretty intense.
It is.
When I hear the hoarder, I think mountains of clutter.
Yes.
Is that really something landlords need to worry about? Isn't it just a personal issue for the tenant?
Well, it can seem that way.
Okay.
But it definitely becomes a landlord's problem when it starts impacting the property's condition and safety,
Right.
and even neighboring tenants.
Okay.
So imagine this. You get a call from a concerned neighbor
Okay.
who reports strange smells wafting from your rental property
Oh.
and piles of stuff blocking walkways.
Oh, no.
So you decide to do a routine inspection,
Okay.
and what you find is less messy tenant
Okay.
and more buried alive in junk situation.
Okay, so we've crossed the line from clutter to a serious problem.
We definitely have.
But what about the tenant's right to privacy?
Oh, that's a great point.
Can a landlord just go in there and start taking pictures of their stuff?
Well, Robert is adamant about respecting tenant privacy,
Okay.
but while also upholding landlord rights.
Right.
So he emphasizes following proper procedures.
Okay.
So in most cases, landlords need to provide reasonable notice before entering a property,
Right.
except for emergencies.
So in this case, the landlord would have given the tenant proper notice for an inspection,
Yes,
giving them a chance to tidy up or at least make the place accessible.
exactly.
Oh.
And remember, the goal isn't to shame the tenant or anything.
Right.
It's about addressing legitimate concerns related to health and safety and the property's condition.
Okay, so the landlord followed protocol, conducted the inspection,
Yes, they did.
and documented the hoarding
They did.
with detailed photos and videos.
That's right. Focusing on areas that pose health hazards or potential fire risks.
Okay, so they have that evidence if needed.
They do.
But let's say the documentation is done. They've confirmed the hoarding. What happens next?
Okay, well, Robert cautions against jumping to really drastic measures.
Okay.
Remember, hoarding is often a symptom of deeper issues,
Okay.
potentially mental health challenges.
Right.
A confrontational approach could make things worse.
Okay.
So in the case he outlined, the landlord actually consulted with a local social services agency
Okay.
that specialized in hoarding behavior. So they really wanted to understand the situation.
Right. And try to find the best way to support the tenant,
Exactly.
but also protect the property.
Right.
It shows that being a good landlord sometimes goes beyond just lease agreements and rent collection.
Definitely.
It's about recognizing that people are complicated and sometimes situations require a little bit more sensitivity.
Right.
So what did they learn from the social worker?
Well, the social worker actually advised the landlord to communicate with the tenant in a non-confrontational way,
Okay.
really focusing on creating a safe and healthy living environment for everyone.
Right.
They also learned about resources that were available to the tenant,
Oh,
things like counseling and support groups,
Yeah.
even professional organizers who specialize in hoarding.
Wow.
So they were offering solutions,
Right.
not just pointing out a problem.
So they were trying to be helpful.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic here. What if the tenant refuses help and just keeps hoarding?
Yeah, that can definitely
Yeah.
happen.
At what point does the landlord's responsibility to the property and other tenants outweigh the tenant's personal struggles?
That's a tough question.
It is.
And that's where things can get legally complex.
Okay.
So while compassion is important,
Right.
landlords also have rights and responsibilities.
Yes.
They need to make sure their property is maintained in a habitable condition.
Right.
So if the hoarding poses a significant health or safety risk,
Yep.
and the tenant refuses help,
Right.
it might be necessary to involve legal counsel and potentially explore eviction proceedings.
It's like that oxygen mask analogy on airplanes.
Yeah.
You have to take care of yourself before you can help others.
Exactly.
So in this case, the landlord's responsibility to the property and the well-being of the other tenants ultimately has to take priority.
It does.
But even in situations like this, you have to follow the right legal procedures.
Absolutely. Eviction is a serious matter.
Right.
And shouldn't be taken lightly.
So it seems like a lot of these problem tenant scenarios really hinge on finding that balance
They do?
between compassion and clear communication and firm action when it's needed.
That's right.
You have to be both understanding
Yes.
and business savvy.
Exactly.
Okay. Are you ready for another common landlord dilemma?
Yes, I am.
This one is a classic. The unauthorized pet.
Ooh, yes. The furry little rule breakers. That can wreak havoc on a no pets policy.
It seems like a situation that many landlords find themselves in,
It really is.
especially when you're dealing with tenants who love their animal companions.
Right.
But maybe don't quite understand the whole lease agreement thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can understand why someone would want to sneak in a pet.
I can.
You find the perfect apartment,
Yeah.
but the no pets rule is standing between you and your furry soulmate.
Right.
So honestly, why are landlords so strict about pets in the first place?
Well, it goes beyond shedding and the occasional accident.
Okay.
Unauthorized pets can really pose challenges for landlords,
Okay.
and it can cost them time, money,
Okay.
and even legal headaches. So for starters, pets can really cause a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Scratched floors, chewed furniture,
Right.
lingering odors, and
Yeah.
all those repair costs can really add up.
Okay, so damaged property is never fun,
No.
especially when you're the one paying for it.
Exactly.
But is that the only concern?
Well, no.
Okay.
Because unauthorized pets can also bring a whole bunch of liability issues.
Okay, how so?
So imagine a scenario where an undeclared pet bites someone on the property
Okay.
or triggers a severe allergic reaction in another tenant.
Oh, right.
So suddenly you're not just dealing with a scratched sofa.
Right.
You're dealing with potential lawsuits,
Yeah.
insurance claims.
Yeah, it's a whole different ball game.
It is.
So it's not about being a pet lover or a pet hater. It's about managing risk and protecting yourself
Exactly.
legally.
Right.
So how do you handle it when you find out a tenant has snuck in a pet?
Okay, well, Robert says always refer back to the lease agreement.
Right.
Because that's the bedrock of the landlord-tenant relationship.
For sure.
So in this scenario, the lease clearly stated a no pets policy.
Okay.
So the landlord had solid legal footing.
They have that proof
Right.
in black and white.
Exactly. So what did they do? So the landlord started by sending the tenant a formal written notice,
Oh,
reminding them of the lease violation,
okay.
and outlining the potential consequences of breaking the no pets rule.
Right, and those consequences could be anything from a warning to an eviction.
Exactly. It really depends on the situation.
Yeah, and the landlord,
Right.
some landlords might be more lenient than others.
That's right. Every landlord has their own approach.
Right.
So in this case, the landlord actually wanted to find a balance between enforcing the rules and recognizing that human-animal bond.
Okay.
So they gave the tenant a few options.
Okay.
They could find a new home for the pet.
Okay.
They could apply for a reasonable accommodation if the pet was a certified emotional support animal,
Okay.
or they could face eviction.
Right, if they chose to keep the pet without permission.
Right. So they gave them some choices.
Right, but they were still upholding the lease agreement.
Exactly.
So what happened?
So the tenant thankfully understood the situation,
Okay.
and they rehomed the pet with a family member.
So a good outcome for everyone.
It was.
The pet, the tenant, the landlord.
Everybody wins.
It sounds like this really emphasizes the importance of addressing unauthorized pets right away,
Yes, it does.
rather than letting it slide and hoping for the best.
Exactly. The longer you wait, the harder it is.
Right, because the tenant gets more attached to the pet.
Right.
The longer it goes on, the greater the chance of damage or liability issues.
Exactly.
So it's best to address it quickly.
It is.
And this also highlights the value of open communication.
It does.
Because if a tenant comes to you and says, hey, I want to get a pet,
Yes.
it's better to have a conversation.
Exactly. An open, honest conversation.
Yeah, about your policies and expectations.
Yes.
Maybe there's room for negotiation or a pet deposit.
Right.
Or an addendum to the lease agreement.
Exactly.
So finding those win-win solutions
Yes.
whenever possible.
Right.
Okay, ready for another one?
I am.
This one sounds pretty intense.
Oh.
The domestic disturbance.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this seems like one where a landlord would be walking a tightrope
They would.
between wanting to help and wanting to stay out of the drama.
Right. It's a sensitive situation.
Yes.
And potentially volatile.
Yeah, so imagine you're a landlord enjoying a nice quiet evening,
Oh, okay.
and suddenly you get bombarded with noise complaints
Oh, no.
from all your neighbors.
Yeah.
They're reporting loud arguments, shouting maybe even sounds of a physical altercation
Oh, no.
coming from one of your rental units.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, so now the alarm bells are going off.
They are.
Not only for the safety of your tenants,
Right.
but also for the potential disruption to the whole community.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly stressful.
It is.
It's like being thrust into the middle of a personal crisis,
Right.
and you're not trained for that.
No.
So what does Robert Flowers advise in this kind of situation?
Well, Robert says you always have to prioritize safety,
Okay.
but also respect tenant rights.
Right.
So it's a tricky balance.
Yeah.
So while it might seem like calling the police is the immediate solution,
Right.
he says you shouldn't jump to conclusions or escalate the situation unnecessarily.
So be cautious and thoughtful
Exactly.
instead of reacting impulsively.
Right.
So gather information, assess the situation before taking any drastic action.
Yes.
So what did the landlord do in this case?
Okay, so they started by documenting every single noise complaint
Okay.
that they received from the neighbors.
Right.
And they made sure to include the dates and times
Yes.
and specific details about the disturbances.
So they're building up a record of the ongoing issues
Right.
in case they need to take further action.
Exactly.
But they didn't stop there, did they?
No, they didn't.
They also tried to contact the tenant directly, expressing concern for their well-being and asking if there was anything they could do to help. So a non-confrontational approach,
Yes.
just trying to understand what was going on inside.
Exactly.
But it's important to remember that landlords aren't trained mediators
They're not.
or therapists.
No.
They can't force people to resolve their conflicts.
That's true.
So there's a limit to what a landlord can do.
There is.
And sometimes the best thing you can do is just offer support and resources.
Right.
So did they get any information when they contacted the tenant?
They did not.
Oh, no.
The tenant was evasive,
Okay.
denied any problems,
Okay.
and basically shut down communication.
Oh, no.
But the noise complaints kept coming.
So it was clear that there was a different picture than what the tenant was saying.
Right. So now the landlord is stuck between respecting the tenant's privacy
Right.
and the safety of the community.
So what did they do?
So they ultimately contacted the police
Okay.
and reported the ongoing disturbances.
Okay.
And they gave the police all of the documentation that they had gathered.
So it was a tough decision,
It was.
but they prioritized the safety of everyone
They did.
and the well-being of the whole community.
That's right.
So it just goes to show that sometimes, despite our best efforts, outside intervention is necessary.
Sometimes it is.
Landlords aren't superheroes.
That's true.
They can't solve every problem or mediate every dispute.
Right.
So this situation highlights the importance of having a plan in place
It does.
for dealing with these kinds of situations.
Yes.
So knowing your local laws,
Yes.
understanding your responsibilities, having a clear protocol
Exactly.
for documenting incidents,
Yeah.
and involving authorities when it's necessary.
It's also really important to familiarize yourself with local resources that are
Yeah.
related to domestic violence.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because many communities have support services.
Right.
And landlords can help connect tenants to those resources.
Right. It goes beyond that landlord-tenant dynamic
It does.
and recognizes that sometimes people need a little bit more help
They-
than what you can provide.
Right.
Okay, ready to shift gears a little bit.
Yes, I am.
Let's move away from those high-drama situations
Okay.
and dive into a problem that's more of a slow burn,
Right.
the wear and tear dilemma.
Oh, yes. The age-old debate about normal wear and tear
Yeah?
versus tenant-caused damage.
Yeah, it's like that classic argument
It is.
about who left the toilet seat up.
Right.
Everyone has their own interpretation of what's acceptable.
They do.
So how do you even define normal wear and tear?
Well, it's the gradual deterioration
Oh,
that
right.
happens naturally over time
Okay.
as a property is used and lived in.
Yeah.
So things like faded paint,
Yeah.
slightly worn carpets from foot traffic,
Okay.
maybe a loose doorknob or two.
Right.
It's all part of the natural life cycle of a rental.
So it's stuff that landlords should just expect
Yes,
and budget for.
Exactly. It's just the cost of doing business.
Right.
But then you have tenant-caused damage.
Okay.
And that goes beyond that normal wear and tear of everyday living.
Right. So things like large holes in the walls,
Yeah.
appliances that are broken
Oh.
because they haven't been used properly,
Right.
carpets that are stained from spills that weren't cleaned properly.
Yeah, right.
All of those are signs of damage that go beyond the scope of normal use.
And those are the things that the tenant should be held accountable for,
Exactly.
either through repairs or deductions from their security deposit.
Right, but the challenge is, where do you draw that line
Right.
between what's reasonable wear and tear
Right.
and what's blatant tenant damage?
It's really subjective.
It is.
And that's where those disputes often come in.
Exactly.
So how can a landlord protect themselves?
Documentation.
Okay, there it is again.
That's Robert's favorite word.
Yeah.
So the landlord in the scenario had a very detailed move-in inspection report.
Okay.
And they took photos of everything
Okay.
to show the condition of the property.
So it's like that before picture.
Yeah.
It's compared to the after picture.
And you can spot any discrepancies.
Exactly.
So when the tenant moved out, the landlord did another thorough inspection.
Yes, they did.
They documented everything.
They did.
And they compared the two reports
They did.
side by side
Yes.
to determine what damage was outside of normal wear and tear.
Exactly.
So they eliminated any guesswork.
They did.
And they had that concrete evidence.
They did.
So that's super helpful if you're dealing with a tenant who's disputing charges.
Yes, it is. You have the proof right there.
Right.
So in this case, the tenant had caused some minor damage,
Okay.
a few small holes in the walls, some carpet stains,
Okay.
things that were clearly beyond wear and tear.
Okay.
And so the landlord deducted the cost of those repairs from the tenant's security deposit,
Okay.
and they gave them an itemized list
Okay.
of all the deductions.
So being transparent.
Yes, being fair and transparent.
But what if they still dispute the deductions?
Well, unfortunately, it does happen, so
Yeah.
clear communication is really crucial. So Robert recommends that landlords clearly explain the reason behind each deduction
Okay.
and provide evidence
Okay.
from those inspection reports.
So those detailed reports become your weapon
They do.
to back up your claims.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's also a good idea for landlords to familiarize themselves with local laws
Right.
regarding security deposit deductions
Yeah.
and the process for resolving any disputes, because
Okay.
they can be different.
Yeah, knowledge is power,
It is.
especially when you're navigating all the legal complexities of being a landlord.
Right.
Okay, ready for another scenario?
Yes, I am.
This one I'm sure will resonate with anyone who's ever lived in an apartment building
Okay.
with limited parking. The parking wars.
Oh, yeah. The battle for those coveted parking spots.
Yes.
It can turn even the nicest tenant
Yeah,
into a territorial monster.
I can imagine.
So imagine you're a landlord. You got a limited number of assigned parking spaces.
Okay,
You're trying to keep everyone happy.
right.
And suddenly you're getting bombarded with complaints.
Uh-oh.
Tenants are parking in the wrong spots.
Okay.
Unauthorized vehicles are taking up all the good real estate.
Yeah.
People are arguing with each other over who gets the best spot.
I can feel the drama.
It's a lot of drama.
Yeah.
So how do you bring order to this parking chaos?
Right, you just get a big spinning wheel and let fate decide?
I wish it was that easy.
I know.
But the key, according to Robert, is to have a very clear and comprehensive parking policy from the very beginning.
Okay.
And this policy needs to be in the lease agreement,
Okay.
so there's no confusion.
So everyone knows the rules of the game before they even sign the lease.
Exactly.
Oh.
So in this case, the landlord had specific parking spaces assigned to each unit,
Okay.
and they outlined all the rules about guest parking
Right.
and unauthorized vehicles.
Okay.
So they were setting those boundaries from the start. But even with the best rules in place,
Yeah.
people don't always follow them. So in this case, the landlord found that people weren't always following the rules.
Yeah, good.
Maybe they forgot, maybe
Yeah.
they felt entitled,
Yeah.
but the parking lot was becoming a free-for-all.
So what did the landlord do about this parking rebellion?
Okay, well, Robert says to take a measured and proactive approach.
Yeah.
So they started by sending out a friendly reminder to all the tenants about the parking policy.
Right.
And they emphasized how important it was to respect the rules.
So just a gentle reminder
Yes.
to get everyone back on track.
Exactly. Catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Exactly.
But they didn't stop there.
Okay.
They also made the parking policy more visible.
Okay, how so?
So they posted signs
Oh.
in the parking lot,
Okay.
clearly marking those assigned spaces
Yeah.
and any designated guest parking area.
Right. Those visual reminders
Yeah.
are so important.
They are.
Because even when you're in a rush and not really thinking,
Right.
Those signs are right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the people who are really pushing it?
Well, for those people, they implemented a parking permit system.
Okay.
So every authorized vehicle got a permit.
Good.
And that made it really easy to see who belonged there
Right.
and who didn't.
So they created a system of accountability.
Exactly.
Okay, so now if you don't have a permit,
Yes.
you're risking a ticket or even getting towed.
Exactly.
Okay. But I imagine the landlord didn't want to be the parking police.
No, not at all.
But they had to enforce the rules fairly
They did.
for everyone.
Right.
So for the people who continue to break the rules,
Yes.
they issued warnings.
Right.
And sometimes they even had to impose fines,
They did.
as outlined in the lease agreement.
That's right.
So actions have consequences.
They do.
You can be understanding,
Yes.
but you also need accountability
That's true.
to maintain order and fairness.
Exactly.
So this scenario highlights the importance of having that well-defined parking policy,
Yes.
clear communication,
Yes.
and consistent enforcement.
It can really prevent a lot of headaches
Yeah.
when it comes to parking.
It sets the stage for a smoother landlord-tenant relationship,
It does.
even for something as simple as parking.
Right.
Okay, ready to tackle a problem that I think can be really perplexing.
Yes.
Let's sniff out the source of the mystery smell.
Oh, the elusive odor
Yeah.
that can plague a rental property.
It can be frustrating to pinpoint,
It is.
and even more frustrating to try to get rid of.
It can?
It can leave landlords and tenants feeling baffled.
It really can.
So what kind of smells are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about things that are more than just a tenant needing some air freshener.
Okay.
So things like cigarette smoke,
Yeah.
pet odors,
Yeah.
that musty, damp smell that makes you think there could be mold.
Oh, yeah, those are bad.
Those are the kinds of odors that can make a property feel uninhabitable
Right.
and can lead to tenant complaints and potential health concerns.
Right.
So you definitely don't want those in your property.
So how does a landlord approach a situation where there's a mystery smell?
Well, Robert recommends that you play detective
Okay.
and try to determine the source of the odor.
All right, so put on your Sherlock Holmes hat
Exactly.
and try to figure it out.
Yes.
So what did they do in this case?
So they started by conducting a thorough inspection of the property,
Okay.
looking for any obvious culprits.
Okay.
Were there any pet stains under the rugs?
Okay.
Any mold growth in damp corners?
Okay.
Had the previous tenant been a smoker?
Right, so they're looking for visual clues
Exactly.
that might explain what that smell is.
Yes, and they also talked to the tenant
Okay.
because sometimes the tenant might be aware of the issue,
Okay.
but they're hesitant to say anything because they don't want to get blamed.
Right.
So in this case, the tenant mentioned that they had been cooking with a lot of spices,
Okay.
which might have contributed to the smell.
Right, so a little more innocent
A little more in
than a hidden mold infestation.
Right.
But what if they don't find any obvious sources?
Yeah.
And the smell lingers?
Well, you can't just spray air freshener and hope for the best.
Right, because that might mask a more serious problem.
Exactly. So Robert recommends calling in the professionals
Okay.
for those really persistent smells. So
Right.
a trusted plumber,
Okay.
a mold remediation specialist.
Right, so they have their A-team ready
They do.
to tackle any challenge
Right.
that comes up.
Exactly.
So there's a plumbing issue. The plumber could take care of it,
Yes.
eliminate the source of the odor.
Right.
And if there's mold,
Yes.
the mold remediation specialist can assess the situation,
Yes.
contain it, and treat it.
Exactly.
So they know when to bring in those experts
They do.
and trust them to handle the situation.
Yes. And remember, landlords are responsible
Yeah.
for providing tenants with a safe and habitable place to live.
Right.
And that includes addressing those persistent smells.
Especially if they come from plumbing or mold.
Yes, it's about protecting tenant health
Right.
and well-being.
So it goes beyond just collecting rent.
It does.
It's about providing a safe and comfortable living space.
Exactly.
Oh, are you ready to delve into a problem that can make even the bravest landlord shudder?
Oh, yes, bring it on.
The pest infestation.
Those unwelcome guests.
Those creepy crawlies.
Yes.
That can turn a rental unit into a nightmare.
They can.
Yeah, whether it's ants,
Uh,
cockroaches,
yeah.
rodents, bedbugs.
All of them?
It can turn a dream rental into a living nightmare.
Absolutely.
Ugh, even just talking about it gives me the chills.
I know.
So how do you approach this kind of problem?
Well, Robert emphasizes the importance of acting quickly.
Okay.
Because The longer you wait, the worse it's going to get.
Right.
So in this case, the landlord found signs of a cockroach infestation,
Okay.
and they immediately called a pest control company
Okay.
to assess the situation and come up with a treatment plan.
So bringing in the experts.
Yes, the pest control cavalry.
Yeah, because they know how to deal with these unwelcome invaders.
They do.
But what about the tenant?
Oh, that's a great point.
I imagine having to move out of your home while they're doing this
Yeah.
can be super disruptive
It can be.
and stressful.
So Robert always emphasizes minimizing the disruption to the tenant
Okay.
whenever possible.
Okay.
So in this case, the landlord worked with the pest control company
Okay.
and the tenant
Okay.
to come up with a plan that worked for everyone.
Right.
So they scheduled treatments when it was convenient for the tenant
Okay.
and made sure that they had plenty of notice
Okay.
so they could make other arrangements if they needed to.
So finding that balance between taking care of the problem,
Yes.
but also taking care of the tenant.
Exactly.
And communication is so important in these situations.
It is.
So the landlord kept the tenant informed about the treatment plan. Okay, welcome back to the Deep Dive's Problem Tenant Chronicles. We've covered some crazy situations so far. Everything from mountains of junk to animals escaping and parking lot arguments.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But as we've learned, even the craziest situations can usually be fixed with good communication, patience, and knowing what to do.
That's right.
It's like we're building a mental toolkit for landlords.
Yeah.
And speaking of challenges, let's talk about something that a lot of landlords can relate to, especially those who rent to multiple people. The roommate rumble.
Oh, yeah. The joys of sharing an apartment.
Right?
It can be great, but it can also turn into a nightmare for the landlord.
It's like being back in a college dorm, but with higher stakes and legal stuff to worry about.
Exactly.
What kinds of problems usually come up with roommates?
Well, it can be anything from small annoyances to big issues.
Okay.
Personality clashes, disagreements over cleanliness or noise levels, money problems, relationship drama.
Oh no, it's like a pressure cooker that's about to explode.
That's a good way to put it.
So where does the landlord's responsibility begin and end?
Right.
Do they have to be a therapist and try to fix every little argument?
Robert Flowers is very clear about this. Landlords are not therapists or relationship experts.
Do they?
Their job is to manage the property and enforce the lease agreement.
So if the roommates are arguing about dirty dishes or loud music, the landlord doesn't have to get involved.
Right.
Okay.
But landlords do have to make sure everyone is safe and that the environment is peaceful.
Okay.
So if the fighting gets too bad and it starts to affect other tenants or damage the property, then the landlord needs to do something.
So it's about protecting everyone involved.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in this story, the landlord got a bunch of complaints from other tenants about loud arguments and parties in a unit with 3 roommates.
Oh boy.
They also saw some damage in the common areas that the roommates seemed to have caused.
So it was clear that the problem was bigger than just a personal disagreement.
Right. It was affecting other people and the property.
So what did the landlord do?
Robert always says that clear communication is key.
Okay.
So the landlord sent a letter to all 3 roommates reminding them about the rules for noise and damage.
It's like saying, hey, you need to get it together.
Right.
But did the landlord just leave it at that?
No, they knew that sometimes conflict happens because people aren't communicating well.
Okay.
So they offered to help the roommates talk things out in a mediated conversation.
Wow, that's really going above and beyond.
They wanted to give the roommates a chance to say what was bothering them and find some solutions.
That's great.
So they provided a neutral space for the conversation.
And did it work?
Yes, it did.
Wow.
The roommates were able to talk about their issues and listen to each other, and they actually came up with some rules to share the space better.
So everyone wins.
Exactly. The roommates are happy, the other tenants are happy, and the landlord doesn't have to get more involved.
That's a happy ending.
It is.
But I imagine it doesn't always work out that way.
You're right. Sometimes, even with the landlord's best efforts, the situation is just impossible.
Yeah.
People just can't get along, and the place becomes a toxic environment.
So what happens then?
Well, sometimes the landlord has to think about eviction.
Oh, wow.
It's the last resort, but if the conflict is really bad and it's affecting the safety of other tenants or the property, then the landlord might have to evict the roommates.
It sounds like it's important to know the laws about eviction.
It is. Landlords need to follow the right procedures.
Right. Even when things are stressful, it's important to stay calm and do things the right way.
Absolutely.
Okay, ready for one last mystery?
I'm ready.
Let's talk about the disappearing tenant.
Oh, yes. The tenant who vanishes.
It's like they went into a black hole and left no trace.
Right.
What makes a tenant just disappear?
That's a good question, and there are a lot of possible answers.
Okay.
Sometimes they're trying to avoid paying rent or having a confrontation. Other times, it's because something unexpected happened, a sudden illness, a family emergency, or even just forgetting to update their address.
So it's a real mystery.
It is, and the landlord is stuck with an empty apartment, unpaid rent, and a lot of questions.
So what do you do in that situation?
Robert says you should try to contact the tenant in every way possible.
Okay.
Send letters, leave voicemails, call any emergency contacts they listed.
So do some detective work.
Exactly.
Okay.
You want to try everything you can before doing anything drastic.
Okay.
So in this case, the landlord even asked the neighbors if they knew anything.
Did they find anything out?
No, they didn't.
Oh, no.
The tenant was completely gone.
So what happened, though?
Robert says it's important to protect your rights and your investment.
Okay.
So he told the landlord to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
And the lawyer said to start the eviction process, even though they didn't know where the tenant was.
So even though the tenant disappeared, there were still legal steps to take.
Yes, eviction is a way to formally end the lease agreement and get control of the property back.
Okay.
And there are specific rules for when a tenant abandons a property.
It sounds complicated.
It can be, but it's important to do things the right way so you can rent the property to somewhere else.
Right.
So the landlord had to give proper notices, file papers with the court, and eventually get a judge to give them back the property.
Wow. These problem tenant chronicles have been really interesting.
They have, haven't they?
It's amazing how many different problems landlords can have.
It is.
It seems like the most important things are to know the law, understand the best ways to do things, and use common sense.
You got it.
It's like we've been building a toolkit for landlords.
Exactly. And remember, we've only talked about a few problems here.
Right?
There are lots of other challenges, but the important things are always the same: communication, documentation, proactive steps, and asking for help when you need it.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And a well-informed landlord is a happy landlord.
That's true.
A huge thanks to Robert Flowers for sharing his experience and wisdom in his book, The Joy of Helping Others.
Yes, you can find it on Amazon.
It's a great resource for any landlord.
It is.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Problem Tenant Chronicles Volume 1.
We hope you learned a lot.
And maybe had a few laughs along the way.
Maybe.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Yes, it is.
Until next time, everyone.
See you then.